Hi everyone, I'm Valentin. Really happy to be here today with Product Drive to talk about how to collect and analyze customer feedback. So to start with, just a quick introduction about myself. I'm the co-founder and CPO at Harvester. Harvester is a product management software solution for customer-driven teams, and part of what we do is actually about collecting, centralizing feedback from different sources, and helping product teams track and analyze this feedback to build the best products. So as an introduction and to start with, I really like this sentence from Jack Welch, who said that there are basically two sources of competitive advantage for a company. The first one is the ability to learn more about your customers faster than the competition. And the second one is the ability to turn that learning into action faster than the competition. And that's really about what collecting and analyzing customer feedback is about. It's about learning faster than your competitors and taking action faster than your competitors by using this learning. It's actually also a way to differentiate because HubSpot, according to HubSpot research, 42% of companies don't listen to their customers, which means that 42% of companies don't collect and take action on feedback from customers to improve their products. So doing it and doing it in the right way is a huge opportunity for you to differentiate on your market, build better products than your competitors, and ultimately to win. Even product managers actually don't listen that much to customers, or at least they cannot spend as much time as they would like to talking to customers, because when we look at sources of inspirations and ideas for the product roadmap, we can see that customer feedback is the number one source of inspiration. And however, when we look at main product managers' main activities and what they do, we can see that interacting with customers is actually not the number one priority, because of course the role of a product manager is about also having meetings, organizing collaboration, communication around the product, organizing work around product development. So there's so many things, and in the end, you don't take enough time actually to talk to customers, to understand your customers, to take action on their feedback. And that's also why it's so important to have this process in place from the very beginning. So what can help you actually collect and analyze customer feedback, even at scale, is what we could call the customer feedback loop. So it's the continuous learning process that will help your team, your product team, gather and leverage customer inputs. So customer inputs can be customer feedback, qualitative customer feedback, or quantitative data. So leverage customer inputs to take the right roadmap decisions. So that's why also customer feedback, collecting feedback and analyzing feedback is not about doing what your customers tell you to do. These are only inputs that you can then use to understand underlying problems and take your own roadmap decisions based on this data. So we're going to talk about 4 things together. The first thing to collect feedback is actually systematizing feedback collection. So make sure you have the right channels and processes in place to collect feedback at the right time, to collect quality feedback that you can use then to build your roadmap. The second thing is, once you have actually collected this feedback, how you can organize it in what I call a feedback hub. The third thing, and that's the analysis part, is when you have an organized feedback hub, how can you use this data, this information, to prioritize customer problems and decide what you're going to build. And the last thing that's too often forgotten by companies is making sure that when you collect feedback, you always close the loop with customers to reward them and engage them more and get even more feedback from these customers. So how can you systematize feedback collection? What we often see is that people forget about some specific phases in product adoption where they should collect feedback, but when they actually don't. There are different times when you can collect feedback. The first time is what we could call the marketing time, where people actually interact with your website. They have not tried a product yet. They are just seeing the value proposition. Maybe they looked at the competition, and that's also a great way to collect feedback from these customers who have not yet tried your product, because product is not only about features, it's also about how people and potential users perceive actually the value of their product without even trying it. So that's a time where it's really important also to collect feedback. The second time is onboarding. Onboarding is basically the phase where when users really start playing with your product, they discover your product, and that's when you want to bring them to what we could call the aha moment. And very often, actually, people tend to focus on the adoption phase to collect feedback. They collect feedback just when people are already using the product, but you can also capture really interesting feedback when you solicit people during onboarding to understand what works, what doesn't work, and how you can bring them to the aha moment, because it's really critical for new users. And the last phase when you want to actually collect feedback is the churn phase. So that's when you can identify frustrations from users who left your product and take this feedback to actually prevent churn from happening, identifying missing features, identify why users, customers go to the competition. So when is not really about time, so it's not collecting feedback 2 weeks after the onboarding. It's really about events. So what you want to do is collect feedback when, for example, onboarding was not successful. And this means that you need to identify the events that make actually an onboarding not successful. So that's the kind of things we do with Intercom. So we know that an onboarding was not successful if a user didn't perform certain actions. And when that happens, we actually send here an email question asking why actually the onboarding failed, why they haven't been using the product that much, although they signed up recently. And that's really important to gather quality feedback, and relevant feedback. It's really important to collect this feedback at the right time, because if you collect feedback really in an inaccurate way and ask for onboarding feedback, for example, to someone who has left your product for months, it's not relevant anymore, and you're not going to have actually good reply rates and quality feedback. So when you collect feedback is really important. And actually, in our case, we use Intercom to do that, and it helps us automate it and get replies very often and automatically in our inbox, and get actually very interesting feedback. For example, here, that's the kind of answers that we could get for this question we ask about failed onboardings. And it really helps us. As you can see, I have here 3 different insights that I can use then to improve my onboarding. And if I get such interesting feedback and good reply rates also, it's because I'm asking the right question at the right time. So the second aspect of feedback collection is where you collect feedback and what channels you're using. So very often people tend to focus on prompted channels. So it's channels basically where you proactively send questions or ask for feedback to customers via surveys, emails, for example, user interviews. What you should not forget are all these unprompted channels that you already have and where feedback already is. And usually that's where the biggest part of your feedback already is, and that can be customer support tools, chats like Intercom, for example. It can be your sales and marketing teams who are talking with customers on a daily basis and who also have feedback, very important feedback for the product team. It can be reviews platform. So it's really important to map all those channels and make sure that you really get feedback from everywhere, not to forget a source and forget interesting data. So what you can do is basically start mapping and doing an audit of your different channels and see also where you get the best feedback, because that's then where you want to focus your efforts on to collect more feedback and to iterate on the channel, because you don't want to have 1,000 channels to collect feedback. You just want to have a few ones where you will be able to focus and iterate to increase the quality and the quantity of the feedback that you get. So that's an example of how you can structure your feedback channel audit to identify the different channels and make sure you focus your efforts on the right ones. Then systematizing feedback collection is about how you're going to ask questions. So in the example I showed before, for our onboarding feedback question, we collect feedback at the right time, so when the opening is failing, and we also come with the right question, because this question is based on events that we tracked, and that's why people are actually replying, and that's when you get actually the right feedback. You always want to identify, of course, underlying problems. Collecting feedback is not about asking customers, what do you want? It's more about asking, what are your problems? What problems are you facing with our product? What did you not understand correctly? And you always want to dig deeper into customer feedback to understand underlying problems. And a good way to do it when you're talking with a customer, for example, is always ask why. Why does someone need a feature, instead of saying just yes, okay, we're going to implement this feature because you asked for it. What's really important is to go back to the problems, because that's where you're going to have actually a bigger picture of how you can improve your products, instead of having just a list of requests that you want to implement. Then you need to understand, of course, that asking the right questions is really a science, and there are ways to ask questions to get the right information. So there is a lot of interesting literature about it. And that's not something that needs to be neglected. And what we do, for example, is that we, when we ask feedback by email, we make sure that we try different versions of how we ask the question, to see which version will get us the highest reply rate, and which version will get us also the best quality feedback. And I really encourage you to look at what salespeople are doing, because salespeople, when they do outreach campaigns, when they prospect, they really iterate in the way they approach customers, in the content of their emails. And that's also something that you need to do when you ask feedback to customers, in order to make sure that you're going to get replies and that you're going to get the right information. So to illustrate what I just said, that's the template we use to actually collect feedback from users who didn't complete the onboarding, who left after the onboarding. And as you can see, it's structured in a way that we optimized it to get the highest reply rate and the best information possible. So we, of course, introduce ourselves to make it personal. What works really well is also to introduce yourself as the person working on the product. It's always a great way to show customers that you're really caring about what they have to say to improve your product. Always also explain the context. This shows that you don't just contact people from nowhere, but you contact people for a reason, and that your feedback is based on a specific context, and that this customer is actually able to give you relevant information in this context. It's important to have a call to action, so to tell people what you actually expect and incite them to give you a reply. And of course, show you're listening. So of course, show it in your emails and in your communication, but also show it by closing the feedback loop, which is something we're going to talk about right after. You also need to segment feedback, segment users, in order for you to then analyze the feedback you're collecting. So make sure you segment your users and send feedback to different actually segments. So You want to get feedback from active users, but also inactive users, for example, from power users, from new customers and old customers, because by segmenting feedback and by segmenting customers, you're able to collect different kind of information that you can use to improve different parts of your product and different steps in your experience. Once you've collected feedback, once you've systematized feedback collection and make sure is that it's as automated as possible, once you've optimized on volume and quality, you need to make sure that you build an organized feedback hub where you centralize everything, organize everything, and track everything to build your roadmap. So there are, as we said, prompted sources and unprompted sources of feedback. Really, I encourage you to map them all and make sure that they all get to the same place, that all the feedback that you gather from these different sources are in a central place where you can search, analyze this feedback and use it to build your roadmap. Otherwise, it's just going to be lost. And actually, what we see is that more than 50% of the feedback that you're collecting through different sources is lost and never makes it to the product team, which is really a pity, and which also means that you're losing lots of opportunities to understand customer problems and improve your product accordingly. Once you've centralized everything, as we said before, it's not about having a list of feature requests. It's really about understanding problems. So if you have feedback from support, feedback from sales, feedback from customers, you need to aggregate all these feedback messages and all these insight into problems, because that's where you're going to see potential opportunities emerge, and that's also how you're going to be able to prioritize these problems against each other into roadmap projects. So it starts with feedback, of course, and you will have feature requests, but make sure you categorize and aggregate all these feedback messages into problems, and then again organize these problems into roadmap projects that you're gonna prioritize. How you can actually prioritize and analyze these feedback. Once you have identified problems and aggregated feedback into these problems, you first need to build your own system to analyze it and prioritize it into your roadmap. So it's not about just copying prioritization frameworks. It's really about asking yourself, what are the criteria that matter to my product, to my industry, to my company, and that these are the criteria that we want to use to prioritize problems and analyze them also to see how important a problem is for you or not. It's in terms of prioritization always relevant to chase quick wins, so things that you can easily implement without too much effort and without also moving or postponing your other projects on the roadmap. And the last thing that's important for prioritization is that feedback alone is not supposed to dictate your product roadmap. It should, of course, be a source of inspiration and an input, but it's not because, for example, you have 90 customers asking for a feature that you should do it. And you should always compare one feedback message from one customer to the other problems that you're currently working on, to the company's goals, and to other criteria that matter to you in order to take the right decisions. Last but not least, if you collect feedback but that customers never hear back actually from you, what will happen is that customers won't make efforts again to give you feedback, because the worst thing that can happen for a customer is that the customer does not feel that the company is listening, that the company is doing something with this feedback. So it's really important to make sure that you give updates to customers when they give you feedback. And it's also important because it generates a lot of opportunities for your product and for your business. So what you really want to avoid is what we could call a feedback black hole, which means customers send feedback, but they just never hear back from you. If you do that, what will happen is that customers will not make efforts again to give feedback to your product team, and it will basically give them a very bad image of the company and of how you're listening to them. And again, if you actually provide updates and if you're able to close the loop, it's going to be a big differentiator, because as we saw, 50% of the companies don't even listen to customers. So there is even a part that also doesn't provide updates, and that's really a way you can differentiate. So that's an example from Zapier, that basically provide an immediate response first when you actually give feedback. So they explain that that's something that they're taking into account. They explain that your feedback has been escalated actually to the product team, and they already give you an overview of the importance of your feedback in the roadmap. And that's really something positive in terms of customer experience, because when you get these kind of messages, you actually really understand that in front of you there is a product team and a company that's listening. Then once you've acknowledged and told customers that you're actually listening, you also need to prove it, and the way to do it is by really closing the loop, so providing regular updates about what this feedback becomes, where it is on the roadmap, and notify customers when you ship a feature that they're interested in. And why you should do it is, of course, from a customer experience perspective, it's really important, but it's also a way to engage a community of users who will really feel that your company is listening, and that who could become power users, beta testers, so people that you can really reach out to when you need feedback. And that's something invaluable actually when you're building a product. In terms of experience, it's going to increase, of course, satisfaction. It's going to make also the work of the support team easier, because they are the people very often who actually receive feedback from customers. It's a way to differentiate, and from a sales and marketing opportunity, it's a way to improve your brand image. And if you're doing sales, if you're in B2B, it's a way to reach back also to customers. When you've shipped a feature they were interested in, reach back to prospects, or when you shipped a feature they're interested in. It's a very good opportunity, closing this feedback loop, to say, hey, you asked for this feature, or you noticed this problem with our products a few months ago. We did not have it in our products at the time, but now we have it. Let's start a discussion again. So to conclude, the way you can collect and analyze customer feedback to build your feedback loop and differentiate from your customers, from your competitors, and build the best product for your customers is by first systematizing feedback collection, building your feedback hub in an organized way, making sure that you aggregate feedback into customer problems that you can then prioritize in your roadmap, and last but not least, closing the loop, always to reward customers. I'm going to finish with this short quote that I really like, that says basically that life's too short to build something nobody wants, and that's also why it's so important to collect feedback regularly and make sure that you're building something that your customers actually need and want. So to conclude with, I wanted to offer you an exclusive access to a freemium plan actually for Harvester. If you are looking for a solution to help you systematize feedback collection and analysis, and make sure that you can use this information to build the right product. So you can sign up on our website, harvester.io, and ping us via our chat to ask for the Product Drive freemium offer. You can also contact us and me at, so here's my email address. And of course, if you like this presentation, or if you didn't like it, feel free to go to this bit link where you can share feedback with me and help me improve this presentation. Thanks, everyone, and take care. Bye-bye.